Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Drill podcast. Today we are talking about the defensive line sleepers, the defensive tackles, the hog mollies up front that are going to be terrorizing quarterbacks in the 2024 season. We each have 5 guys, so we'll be going over 10 defensive linemen today. And we really just, are continuing our grind through the defensive side of the ball. But before we dive into any of our sleepers, Dean Bruce, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to talk about some guys who I think are flying under the radar at this point. I think it's we talked about it in the last video. It's a generational class. I think the depth is pretty strong too. I think it's not just about these guys at the top end.
Yeah, so without further ado, we might as well dive into some of the sleepers. I'm going to start off with my first guy, and that is Joe Evans out of UTSA, a guy that started out at LSU, transferred down to Texas San Antonio, and joined the Roadrunners. He's been a really nice part of this defense. Solid thickness, play strength, and just the ability at the line of scrimmage to consistently fight through blocks. He's not necessarily the athlete that you'd want in order for him to kind of be there as a pass rusher, but I think in terms of just play strength and ability to kind of anchor down, he definitely showcases that. He has the explosion at the snap to where he's kind of able to offset centers, offset double blocks, and kind of create some chaos. But yeah, I do definitely have some questions about him as a pass rusher, especially as he goes to the NFL level. But I've been pleasantly surprised when turning on UTSA tape because he's someone that consistently pops off. And I think he's someone that is going to be one of the more mid-round darlings for the G5 schools.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at G5 talent, Joe Evans is a good guy to be looking out for in the future. I think he was a good do-it-all nose. I thought his pass rush was a little better than you were giving it credit for. I think his explosive traits were the type of stuff that was able to create chaos in the backfield at times. It wasn't super often, but I thought there was potential there at least. I thought his length was also very good. He just overwhelms guy with his size. You mentioned his thickness. He's sitting around 340 right now. It's a big dude for a nose. If he's not the biggest mover, as far as getting to the ball carrier goes, he's a little sluggish at times, but that's what you expect when a guy's carrying 340 pounds of weight behind him. But he makes up for it with a strong tackling form when he gets there. He's able to bring guys backwards. It's hard to get a guy who is really consistently falling forward against him. I thought that was very strong and showed up in his play. I was happy to see Joe Evans. I feel like sort of that 4th to 5th round range, one of the later nose tackles taken or earlier nose tackles taken. But, type of guy who I think sticks around in that range for most of the process. I was excited to watch him. I like these big nose tackles, and Evans is another guy who I can get behind.
Yeah, keep an eye out for Evans this season. But Dean, why don't you go ahead and show us your first sleeper of the night?
Yeah, we can talk about another nose back to back. We saw him a little bit in week 0 if we're recording this right after the Florida State Georgia Tech game. I'm talking about Zeke Biggers, and boy, is he bigger than most of the guys on that team. He's like 335 pounds. He's a huge nose tackle. He possesses some good length as well, and he just fills up space. I think he's a little sort of in the Joe Evans camp of the 4th to 5th round range, underdeveloped as a pass rusher, but it's not really his role. But I think he's a pretty good penetrator as far as getting run stops go. He was given the Florida State center work all evening, or I guess it was noon, all afternoon. He's got very active hands. He even showed, I feel like when I was watching back the tape today, a little bit of a chop move that I really appreciated. I think he's a guy who could be talked about in that early day 3 conversation because of that. I don't see a ton of athletic upside there again because he's a nose. We're talking about these big run stuffer guys. They're not going to be crazy good pass rushers. But I think ultimately, if the Georgia Tech D line and that whole team continues to show out this year, I think Biggers is going to be a guy who makes his way into the draft conversation. I haven't seen much talk about him. He showed up pretty well on the Brugler list, but I think he deserves better. I think he's probably sitting around going to be sitting around DT 15, maybe 12 when the time comes for me. Felt like that kind of guy, the guy I usually see at that end for my rankings.
Yeah, listed at 6'5", 330 pounds. And I think he's pretty quick at the snap, which helps him out. Maybe not the greatest open field athlete, but someone that can kind of cause havoc at the line of scrimmage, get to the point of attack quicker than most. And I think that's going to help him a lot in terms of establishing his positioning in the run game. And I think that's where he's going to be most utilized, is trying to find ways to kind of make him disruptive when it comes to clogging up lanes, limiting the run ability up the middle. And that's something that Biggers can do. It was a big part of the Georgia Tech's victory over Florida State, where he was able to kind of just create that anchor down on a very impressive defensive line for Georgia Tech. I was excited about the defensive play that we saw from them and the upset victory on Saturday. I don't know. This is someone that I think maybe isn't necessarily going to be someone that gets a lot of attention in the draft process, but I feel like when you're looking for a nose tackle, these are the types of guys that you feel pretty confident in when selecting them day 3, and they still find a way to kind of stick around and continue to, carve out a spot in a roster around the league.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be space for guys who are just bigger than the rest of the defensive linemen out there in the NFL.
Yeah, so my next sleeper, I'm going to stick around in the G5 from my last one, going with Tulane defensive tackle Patrick Jenkins, 6'2", 293 pounds. Not the biggest guy. Transferred down from TCU and had some great years with Tulane. Now heading into 2024, expected to continue to build off of that. Last season, 5.5 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss. He's pretty explosive. He shows some nice ability and quickness to get around blocks, get off his blocker, and get into the backfield. And I think that's going to continue. He's not necessarily someone that's going to continue to fly with his production up into like the first round. I don't think he's going to be like an Ed Oliver type of darling in the draft process, but he's someone that I think is still going to be pretty impressive, pretty productive. I'm not sure on his age. I think he's supposed to be a little bit older than most prospects, which I think could hurt him a little bit. But I don't know. I feel like he continued to make impact both in the passing game and in the running game, to where he's able to get outside of the hashes and make plays if he needs him to. He's able to quickly get into the backfield and kind of create pressure or create sacks on the quarterback. This is someone that can make an impact in both areas of the game and has a play style to where I think he can be a rotational defensive tackle pretty easily. And, once he continues to build on that, maybe he can carve out a starting role in the league.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he was a great pass rusher. I got a chance to look at his South Alabama game where he had 2 sacks, and I was like, oh yeah, I see what's happening here. These guys just aren't up to his technical ability yet. I thought he was pretty well developed. I saw him use a club move a couple of times. I was very excited about that. I was also excited. I saw him play big end on a couple of snaps. I was like, okay, that's interesting. They trust his athleticism enough to get out there and move with the tackles like that. Sometimes the bigger guards in the G5, there weren't a ton of them, but the bigger guys were more tough on him than some of the littler dudes. He was taking advantage of a couple size matchups in the G5 area that I'm interested to see if that sort of continues year to year, if he can develop a better skill set against these bigger guards. I think we'll hopefully see that in some out of conference games, but he has a hard time muscling out. But I think if that pass rush production, that 5.5 sacks, just maintains, if he can continue around that 4 to 5 sack level, that's going to be better than a lot of these defensive tackles get in the NCAA level. Even if you're sitting at G5, yeah, don't think he's quite Ed Oliver, but maybe he can be. I'm trying to think of some notable G5 defensive tackles in the last year. Not come to mind right now. I feel like there was a really cool guy out of Tulane a couple of years ago who didn't stick around in the NFL, but I'm struggling to think of him now. Maybe a Malcolm Kuntz type.
Yeah, a guy I was kind of thinking of was maybe like Carl Brooks of Bowling Green, where he was kind of
Yeah.
used both the defensive end and defensive tackle because he was that level of athlete at the college level, but then he went to the NFL, and Brooks has shown some pretty nice promise and flash as a defensive tackle for the Packers, more in a rotational role right now, but he's someone that I think could definitely work into a starting job. And I think Jenkins, if he continues to kind of produce at this rate, could kind of carve out a similar type of career path and maybe find himself as a starter in the league someday. But why don't you take us off with your sleeper number 2?
Yeah, I'll stick into the G5 as well. I'll go with Darius Alexander out of Toledo. Big, strong, fast. Showed up on Feldman's, which is how I started watching him. He apparently hit 20 miles per hour in game speed over the season, and he just has a real nose for the ball carrier. I felt like he was kind of a heat-seeking missile as far as defensive tackles go. I was very impressed by his open field speed. I was very impressed by his strength and leverage. I thought generally he was just a sort of good 3 tech, 5 tech, but I think he could be alignment versatile. He's about 310 pounds. You're not going to want him to play nose a bunch of the time, but he was no slouch in run defense. I heard he added a bit of weight as he went through his high school career. I was looking at his recruiting numbers. He was sitting at 225 when he went into the college level. He's at 310 now, and you can tell he's kept some of that athleticism. I always think that's a good trait to look for when you're seeing these G5 defensive linemen. If they've added a ton of weight and they're able to keep that athleticism, they might be something shocking at the next point. Do I think he could be a little less interested in coasting on his athleticism at times? Yes, I think at times he showed a lack of moves, and sometimes he just didn't have a plan going in. He's just sort of looking for the ball. He got baited on some RPOs every once in a while, but ultimately I think there's all the traits there to be a guy who we could be talking about early day 3, even push his way into day 2 if the athletic numbers translate into combine success and he gets some good run at the all-star games. I think he's an exciting player. I think if we're watching Toledo, I saw some guys talking about Max and Hook at safety, but I think Darius Alexander is going to be the guy to watch on that Toledo defense personally.
Yeah, he's going to be the centerpiece of that front seven for sure. And this is a defense that already got some attention last year because of Quinyon Mitchell. And I think that kind of helps with some of these prospects where, because of these other stars that were a year before them in the draft process, they kind of get more attention and early eyes on them. And that helps them kind of build up more stock than necessarily really entering radars in January or whenever the scouting process really kind of dives in deeper. But 6'4", 210 or 310 had a nice year last year with 4 sacks, 5.5 tackles for loss. This is someone that I think works pretty well both in pursuit and laterally, to where he's able to cover working to the sideline or also getting to the backfield and getting to the quarterback. He's very intriguing and someone that I think has some nice hands, nice just overall push and pop on his hands, to where he's able to kind of offset his blocker, get into the backfield, make a play on the football. It feels almost like simple, where you're just like, oh yeah, he gets the ball, but like that's the main trait you're looking for with some of these guys, and that's what he's going to be doing. He holds his ground well enough to where I'm not necessarily worried about him as a run defender, and he also just continues to kind of make an impact as a pass rusher. So if you can kind of eliminate any concern in both those areas, and we know you're the athlete that you are, then yeah, I mean it's hard not to buy into him.
Yeah, I was very excited. I've been looking out for Toledo since Quinyon Mitchell jumped in the first round, and I was like, yeah, this will be the guy next year, I think, if we're talking about that Toledo defense.
Yeah, so now moving forward, and I'm going to go with Warren Brinson, defensive lineman out of Georgia, a guy that's been working largely as a rotational piece for the Bulldogs in the past 2 seasons, but he really first caught my attention when he was playing against the TCU Horned Frogs in the national championship. The game was out of reach, but the rotational guys got more tick, and he was just continuously getting to Max Duggan, and he was just dominating at the line of scrimmage. Entered this year, I thought he was going to get a little more time. He definitely got some rotational work like each and every game, but he wasn't necessarily starting. He got the start against Florida State. There were some nice moments. I think when you're looking at a guy 6'4", 310 pounds, he has really nice pass rushing ability. And for someone that hasn't really gotten the experience to kind of build up the technique, build up that like just play-to-play consistency that a lot of other guys that are starting it game in, game out get that opportunity for, I'm really intrigued with Brinson. This year he's going to be playing off a Stackhouse, so I think that size and that attention is going to be going to him. And Brinson's going to have some opportunities where he can kind of penetrate the backfield, get to the quarterback, create pressures, create sacks. And I expect him to take advantage. This is a guy that, obviously may not be a sleeper by being a Georgia defensive lineman. Like, that's not that deep of a hole, but I don't know. He's someone that has definitely flown under the radar a little bit as a rotational piece. And I think now that he's starting, I'm expecting a really nice 2024 campaign that puts him on max.
Yeah, I think he definitely has the chance to jump into a starting role with the Georgia defense, losing a couple of those guys last year. I really liked him. I mean, I want to see him play more because he was a rotational guy. I was watching him earlier, and I was just like waiting for him to come on every once in a while. But when he was on, he was pretty solid. I watched him against Bama. He had a sack against Jalen Milroe, who was doing some great work doing pocket manipulation, and Brinson was still able to track him down. Felt like that showed a great sense of lateral athleticism. I felt like he was pretty good moving downhill just in general, pretty strong in the uppers. I saw him get taken down by a couple of double teams every once in a while, but he's going up against a very strong Alabama offensive line that season. And I think, honestly, I'm not 100% sure if Georgia Bama is on the schedule, but if he comes up against Parker Brailsford, I would be afraid if I was Parker Brailsford, because I think that sense of uppers is better. They're going to need to use double teams against him next year. I think I was very happy with him. I mean, even the rotational guys for Georgia have a tendency to get hype. Like, we talked about Zion Logue a little last year. I didn't like him very much, but he was talked about. I think he might have snuck into the draft the last couple of rounds there. So I think being on a team that is just that highly touted and is pushing for a championship is going to bring Brinson into the conversation no matter what. And I think that once people get a look at him and once he hopefully gets some really solid reps next to Stackhouse, like, I think it's probably the sky's the limit for him. I don't think he's going to be a like top end type of guy that Stackhouse is, but I could see him being like a 1-2 punch type pairing where he's seen as more of the pass rusher and Stackhouse is the stout nose.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about these big programs that have kind of rotating pieces on the defensive line. Even Alabama, none of their guys made the list, but I mean, Jaheim Otis almost made our top 10 yesterday, or top 12 guys. There's Tim Smith, who's getting some draft hype, and he's shown some flashes for sure. Tim Keenan is a guy that wasn't necessarily talked about, but he's projected to be the starting nose tackle for them. And I know Deron Payne's little brother, Damon Payne Jr., is supposed to be intriguing in that spot as well. So both programs have some great defensive linemen coming up that could be in for big campaigns. So I'm excited to see what happens for them. But, sleeper number 3, Dean, take it away.
Yeah, I'll shift over to DeAndre Jules. Jules just transferred into South Carolina, but he was playing at Pitt last year. I think of him as a better run defender than a pass rusher, but he kind of has the frame of a three tech. So good natural athleticism. He turns his legs really well. I'd like to see him develop some moves consistently. He doesn't always go in a plan, but he's coming in. He's going to be next to Tonka Hemingway, who's also a pretty big guy, like going to do some work pass rushing. I think those two could be a really scary duo if Jules can keep up his kind of TFL production. I think he had around 9 tackles for loss last season, the Pittsburgh Panthers. I was looking at some interviews with him. He talked about thinking he thinks he could be a second to third round type guy. I'm maybe not that huge on him in comparison to his lofty expectations, but I think he's a stout run defender who will do some solid work on that South Carolina defensive line. If he can keep up his TFL production to the SEC level like he expects, I think we will definitely be talking about him as a prospect next year, especially because I think his athleticism is going to carry him a long way. I think it could also help him develop that pass rush. I think South Carolina isn't necessarily the DT factory we think of like Clemson and other like schools in the South Carolina area, but like, you know, if he can step up next to Tonka Hemingway, I think that D line could be really scary, especially when they don't have a ton of guys who I'm really thinking about at edge next year. I think a lot of the source of the pressure is going to be the interior. So I think Jules is going to get like some good looks this season. I think it'll be a good year for him.
Yeah, I mean, Hemingway and Huntley, this is going to be a very exciting defensive line. And I think it's going to be something that one of the more underrated SEC front sevens in the league. And I believe they have Kennard transferring in as well. So
That's right.
that'll be an interesting defense for sure. And South Carolina's in for a big season, I think, with all the intrigue on offense as well, all their potential playmakers. But 6'4", 323, so great frame. And yeah, like you said, 7.5 tackles for loss last season. He's someone that is transferring in from Pittsburgh now to South Carolina, working next to Hemingway. It's going to be very, very intriguing. He has a short area burst and play strength for a guy that size to where I think you're content with him as your nose tackle for sure. But at the same time, if you're playing him as the 3 tech or a nose tackle in a 4-3 type of look where it's more 1 tech, 0 tech, whatever, this is someone that I think is going to be valuable. So having that 0 through 3 ability at the defensive line, I think is going to add value to him. I don't know if I'm in that second, third range, like you said. Maybe he's a little higher on himself, which I think he should be. But I don't know. I definitely think this is someone that, as long as the play and performance continues, that production is there. This is someone that certainly is going to be on draft boards. Is going to get a lot of attention. And for South Carolina, I mean, they'll be more than happy to have it because that's been a big issue for them. Is just trying to get that consistency on defense. They've had a lot of athletes that have kind of come through, but they haven't necessarily put it all together. Having guys like Jules and Hemingway, if they're able to play with that polish and production consistency from play to play, there's going to be a nice step forward for the Gamecocks, and they could be one of the more dark horse teams in college football.
Yeah, I think I'm excited for their possibilities this year. It always seems like they come up in big games, but just can't keep it consistent enough to really be a contender for the SEC. I think if this defensive line can put in some work and that offensive line can show some upside, they'll be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I'm going to stick in SEC country and go with Omari Thomas for my next sleeper. Defensive tackle out of Tennessee, a guy that can play nose tackle, but similar to Jules, where I think that 0 through 3 ability, 6'4", 325 pounds. He's not necessarily super productive as a pass rusher, but I think he's a good enough athlete to where you're still pretty confident with him on the defensive line. He's very aware at the line of scrimmage. I think he usually is kind of playing and contain and stuff like that, where he's not necessarily used as someone to attack the quarterback, but he is staying in place, making sure that he's ready to kind of get his hands up and swat away at balls. And he does really nice with his timing. He has some deflections in his career, but he's someone that, I don't know, I just continuously watch Tennessee for Omari Thomas, and I'm very intrigued with what I see. I think he's got exciting strength, exciting ability to kind of work off of blocks. I think that lower body half is going to have to continue to develop. He had some plays where he was kind of washed out of the run game, and I think that's pretty consistent for younger nose tackles that aren't necessarily the 340, 350 type of guys. But Thomas has the ability to where I see enough flash as an athlete and as just a play-to-play football player to where I'm like pretty content with him. And I expect that lower half and anchor to kind of continue to develop to where he's one of the more promising and productive defensive tackles in the NFL. Well, nose tackle defensive tackles in the NFL.
Yeah, I feel like that anchor is a trait that gets picked up just the more reps you get in. Like you start to get stronger over the course of your career, and you start to get more plays where you're like, okay, this is what I need to do to settle down. I think Omari Thomas is going to be a guy who has the benefit of time on his side. I also thought his explosion was pretty strong. I felt like you said, his athleticism was good, and that like kind of burst out of the snap at times when he was really engaging the ball carrier. When he was doing that, it showed. And when he was in contain, he was showing enough lateral movement skill to where I was like, okay, this guy can be somebody who can make waves at the NFL level because he is that type of athlete. Yeah, I thought his lower body was a little disappointing. I felt like he was a little bit worked with double teams with that anchor, and like people were able to pile on him, which, it's good when you're eating double teams as a nose tackle. It's not good when the double teams are eating you. But I think that's a guy who could, he has the benefit of time on his side. He's a bit younger than some of the other guys we're talking about. And he's at a big time school where that program has like kind of a history of like developing good defensive players. I think it's going to be a good year for Omari Thomas. I like the upside of him, and I think he's going to also get some benefits of his like transfer portal, like people from the transfer portal who left Tennessee are gone, and he's kind of now the face of that defense, because I think Tyler Barron left for Louisville from Tennessee. I think Omari Thomas is going to be a guy who steps up and replaces some of the guys who have been left behind, who have left Tennessee for greener pastures, I suppose. Tennessee's not a team I'm super excited about this year, but Omari Thomas I think could be a player who changes that around for me.
Yeah, and I do think there are some pieces on that defensive line to kind of draw away the attention, but I think Thomas gets a lot of attention from the opposing offensive line, which I think benefits who he's playing next to. Norman Lott and James Pierce are obviously guys that are very productive against the pass, but I think when you're looking at the attention when it comes to blocks, I just feel like so much goes on Thomas that goes unnoticed, to where guys like Norman Lott and James Pierce can kind of benefit from that, to where they're more able to kind of just pin their ears back and attack the quarterback and get to the football. And that's going to help their stock. But also I think NFL teams are going to pick on the fact that, hey, that's also Thomas that's getting a lot of that attention, able to make those plays. I feel like you're kind of realizing that Thomas isn't the face of the defense because it's Pierce, but it happens. It happens. No worries.
I'd totally forgotten James Pierce was on that defensive line. I was just like, yeah, James Pierce plays for like, I don't know, Miami or something. I also thought Tyler Barron was on Louisville. I looked that up. I was like, that doesn't sound right. I don't know shit about Tennessee, apparently. Yeah, totally right. Omari Thomas, not the face of that D line, but is going to be a good contributor alongside Pierce. You're totally right. Completely forgot he was there.
Yeah, so we're continuing forward now with the next sleeper. Why don't you go ahead and tell us sleeper number 4 for you?
Yeah, let's talk about Cameron Horsley from Boston College. I think he's going to be a guy who pops up around draft boards this year. I think that both people on the Boston College defensive line, Cameron Horsley and Donovan Eziraku, I'm probably butchering that name. I didn't look it up before recording, but Horsley, as far as interior pressure goes, great explosion, strong hands. I think his athleticism is going to boost him up boards. He's not a great diagnostician yet when it comes to finding the ball, but I think as far as like athletic traits go that he can build off of, I think Horsley's got a guy who is kind of the guy who is on that defensive line, ready to make some progress. He holds himself down in the gap well. He's able to anchor down and not get moved. And he's also feels very strong in the hands. He's not doing a ton of holding stuff, but he's still difficult to disengage from and get tackles. His tackle production was really strong for a defensive tackle this year. I think he racked up around like 35, which I was like, okay, that's kind of surprising for a team that I didn't associate with strong interior pressure. I think he's a bit of a project as far as like defensive tackle goes. I think his technician skills still need to be worked on, but I think Horsley's a guy who could be talked about more if Boston College's defense shows out. I think it sort of depends on the strength of the team around him. But if Boston College can make some waves in the ACC this year, I think they have some strong players on both sides of the ball, and I think Horsley is going to be a guy who, on the defensive side, especially inside that interior, is going to be a guy who shows out, hopping out the gates like sort of like a racehorse. Not to be too much of a dick with the name here, but he's very fast. He sort of has these galloping strides that go down the field. I was very excited watching him. I was like, okay, this is a guy who can make his way to the ball carrier when he gets the moves down, and he's able to work with his athleticism. I liked Horsley a lot.
Yeah, if I had one complaint, it's not necessarily with him. It's just the fact that he's utilized at nose tackle a lot, which I think, a lot of defenses love to kind of just use their best player and make sure that the inside's going to be held up well. This is someone that, I'm probably just going to expect that he's going to go to like the Packers, like round 4, to where he gets back with Halfley there. But yeah, I mean, this is someone that I think is pretty nice with natural strength and power. That's easy to notice at the line of scrimmage and in his attacks. He's someone that I think can clog up the interior for a lighter defensive lineman. But yeah, 6'3", 316 is nothing to scoff at. Like, it's not like a size concern. Like, he's got a solid frame, and he's someone that I think has that versatility, and working at nose tackle now with the Eagles, I think will make him even more intriguing when he goes to the NFL, because I think the pass rush ability and just the ability to kind of show out as an athlete is there, to where, I don't know. It's someone that I think is a lot of projection, just because so much of the usage is at nose tackling is obviously going to be more used outside, more in the 3-tech, 5-tech type of look. But at the same time, I think having that experience in your tool set is going to help your appeal to the NFL, and definitely help build you up as a run defender. So I'm excited for him. I'm more intrigued to see how he's utilized in the new defense this season. But this is someone that I think could definitely make an impact and fly up draft boards as the year goes along.
Yeah, I think nose tackle is a tough place for him. I think that's part of why he hasn't quite developed those diagnostic skills. But if he can sort of show that he's good at nose tackle and also good at 3-tech, that scheme versatility will work well for him.
Yeah, so sticking in the ACC, and I'm going to go with Akheem Mesidor, a guy that it almost feels weird to put him here in the defensive line group. 6'2", 274 pounds. He's lost some weight over the years, so he's down a little bit, playing more edge for Miami, but still more of an interior defensive lineman, because you're probably not having him work as a stand-up rusher. This is someone that I think will put on weight in the NFL, but man, he is such an exciting pass rusher, and he just consistently does it. Last year, he was someone that I had a lot of excitement for. Got injured very quickly into the season, ended up missing most of the campaign. Now he's back with the Hurricanes. This is someone that you look at, just hand ability, like fighting, polish, just the placement, the ability to kind of disengage off of blocks. And Mesidor has that. He has that quickness and that fire out of a cannon type of speed at the snap, to where he is consistently finding his way to the football, whether it's off the edge, working on the interior. He has ways to shoot gaps, find his way inside, get to the ball, and make a stop on the play. Every single time that there is one of these like smaller guys, the big question is like, oh, well, what are you going to do that makes that translate to the NFL? And I just feel like so much of the technical sense and just that ability to kind of fire off of blocks, like I have no questions about it translating. I know that this is risky to kind of say about a guy that's so small and probably has to stick as a defensive lineman. But I don't know. I think you just find him a 4-3 defense, a guy that, or a team that's willing to kind of rotate him between that like 5-tech, 7-tech, whatever, 9-tech even. And I think he's got the ability to kind of work his way to the quarterback, create chaos as a pass rusher, and then hold ground as a run defender on the edge. And I think this is someone that, plenty of teams, as long as they're in that 4-3 or like just playing enough down linemen, will be able to find some appreciation for what he can do, because this guy has just been unstoppable as of late in college football. And I think as long as he stays healthy for the entire year, he's going to kind of re-spark his hype and be one of the top defensive linemen for this year.
Yeah, I remember being very excited about him in the summer of last year. I thought, yeah, this guy's pass rush potential, his juice is just so strong. I mean, he was just kind of doing it all as a like flex DTDE. Like, I mean, just a guy who could pounce on quarterbacks in the ACC, and also was just a strong ass edge setter. I thought he was. I kind of agree. I mean, it's hard to say that. I'm usually a big size guy, but Mesidor kind of like breaks all the rules for me. I mean, I think he's probably going to catch some Cansey comparisons. Better size than Cansey. Don't get me wrong, but like in terms of like length and stuff like that. But similar weight type, and he's like got that great pass rushing juice that Cansey was touted for, even if he hasn't quite had the production yet. But it wouldn't shock me. His stuff in his 2022 season, yeah, that's what we're on now, was very strong. And it had me talking about him early last year. I was very sad when he got injured that early. I felt like he was making a case to be a top 50 player. Now he's a couple years older, and he's a couple injuries worse for wear this year. So maybe his upside isn't quite as high as it used to be. But I think the potential is still there to, at least if a guy in the NFL, like one of the coaches, I'm trying to think who plays these tiny defensive tackles. Let's put on. Let's say Tampa decides that Cansey could use a guy to pair with, or a guy to pair with Cansey. that they're willing to keep that scheme with. I mean, they could use a replacement for Joe Tryon, in my opinion. I don't think he's that good. If they can slot him in there, I think that creates a really scary pass rush group for that team. I think it's just about finding a coach that's willing to use him to his full potential, because I think some of the less creative coaches are going to think, oh, this is just a big defensive end. And he plays well in the interior, and he's able to convert his athleticism even into power. I felt like I was never concerned about his power, even when he was playing up against big ass guards that 2022 season. I'm very excited to see how he comes back this season. I think it could be a good year for him. I think he could be one of those later year seniors who gets talked about in the higher end, like maybe some day 2 conversations at the draft.
Yeah, 16 and a half sacks for his first 3 years. Again, missed most of last season. I think he's someone that can definitely continue to build that stock up and rehabilitate his image with a healthy year and kind of really cap off what's been a decorated pass rushing career. But why don't you take us off with the last sleeper on your list?
Yeah, the last sleeper on my list comes from a sort of touted defense in the NCAA, Yahya Black. He's big, long, and strong, and he moves laterally super well. He even has a great tackling form to go along with it. I think that at times his technicals need to come along, but I think he was really a guy who was just super impressive athletically. His pass rush production was pretty strong. He just had overwhelming movement skills and speed at the point of the interior. I felt like guards were just not able to know what to do with him. He was able to put his hands out and slip past. He was just that kind of guy. That whole defensive line, I had a hard time choosing between Yahya Black and Aaron Graves, but I went with Black because I felt like he was more of the athlete. But I think Black could do a little better in the run game, but I think his pass rush potential is just so strong because of his overwhelming athleticism. I'm trying to remember if he made Feldman's off the top of my head. I didn't catch him because of that. I was just watching Iowa defense, and I was like, oh, this guy can move. He's super strong. I think he's one of those guys who we could talk about as like a Lucas Van Ness type next year. I think he's probably more DT than edge, which Lucas Van Ness was sort of flexing between last year. But Yahya, I think, is going to be a guy who, makes his way into like the day 2 conversations. I think of the guys on my list, he's probably the one with the most round 1 upside because he's coming from a very strong defensive group, and he's going to get attention because they're probably going to be a returning great defensive unit. I'm not quite that high on him yet, but if he can boost his sack production even higher, then I think we're going to be looking at a guy who gets talked about as one of the higher end athletes in the class, and makes his way into these conversations as a great like 3-tech, 5-tech. I think he could play along the line if he develops some run defense skills, but I'm thinking like 3-tech, 5-tech at the moment. So, the sky's the limit for him with those athletic traits. I think it's just a matter of, how good is that Iowa defensive line and how much of that like pie is he going to eat in terms of production?
Yeah, 6'5", 333 pounds. So this is someone that can easily be nose tackle too in the league. Very exciting defensive player. And I don't know, this is someone that I think has the ability to where he's just dominant when it comes to his play on the field. And I thought he was really nice in terms of just his instincts and ability to kind of locate the football. He has dependable play, and I think that consistency from snap to snap is sort of just a trait that all Iowa guys seem to have, but he's just very, very dependable. I didn't see him as much of like a super flashy guy, but I think that consistency and that dependability is going to make him like a long-term starter in the league. But yeah, I don't know. He's someone that I think has the flash and that play strength where you're just saying like, this is someone that I can trust when it comes to making plays on my defense. This is someone that I can count on to kind of limit the ability of the opposing offense. And I think that just seeing that from a defensive lineman in a Iowa defense that was just consistently shutting down and like limiting opposing offenses is very exciting for NFL teams. He was someone that put on weight this offseason, I'm pretty sure, because I don't think Iowa had him listed that heavily, but the Brugler reports had him at like 333 pounds. So that's where I'm getting that size from. So I think he's someone that can play sort of all over. But yeah, last year I think he was a little bit lighter and he was showing some nice flashes as well.
Yeah, I definitely felt like he wasn't like a massive guy last year. Right? Let's see. That Iowa thing had him at 317. Yeah. If he's beefing up this year and he's able to keep that athleticism, that's going to be really exciting. If he can sort of develop an anchor as well, that could really push him up boards.
Yeah, so that is all for our sleepers. That's Team Bruce. I'm Michael Rochman. Next time you see us, we'll be talking about the edge rushing and linebacker class. We're excited for it, and we think that there's additional intrigue coming to you. But until then, that's Team Bruce. I'm Michael Rochman, and that's the 2-minute drill.